Once upon a time there lived beans in Green Valley. These beans were hardworking and they liked trading. Every 4 years they had elections where, on their voting lists, they voted for magpies. Beans also invented banknotes so that they could exchange goods easier, and also to save some for hard times. Magpies liked to show off their wealth. They bought luxury houses and competed with each other whose house was more beautiful. Beans, seeing all this beauty, wanted equally nice homes for themselves. They did not have enough cash, so they went to the printing house to see an important man called Bankster. He gave them loans for their new cool houses without any complications. Nice towns and suburbs were erecting. Streets were shining like an El Dorado. However, the loans needed to be repaid one day. Therefore Beans rolled up their sleeves and worked and worked and worked. Interest rates were merciless, so Beans had to work even harder and faster to be able to return the banknotes. Some Beans got sore palms and went on sick leave. They were no longer able to return loans. Bankster seized their houses, so many Beans had to sleep under the open sky. However, there were still a lot of Beans who tried their luck and took these risky loans. When Bankster ran out of notes for new loans, he suggested cutting down some trees for paper that he needed for printing more notes. And so they did. Beans rolled up their sleeves and cut and cut and cut again. The printing house got enough material for a new shipment of notes. Bankster was also a bit quirky and added a few zeros to new notes. With this invented capital he was able to stock up Beans with more new loans. An increase in the money supply caused bread prices to rise sharply. Beans were hungry for bread and with rumbling stomachs, so they rolled up their sleeves and worked and worked and worked. The elections were approaching. Bankster printed posters with the magpies which had red collars. Beans hoped that perhaps better times were coming, and so magpies with red collars were elected into the magpie nest. Time showed that new magpies didn't do anything. Bread prices didn't fall, more and more houses were seized, and more Beans got sore palms. Beans were cold. Many did not have a roof over their heads. Stomachs were rumbling. Beans gathered and clenched their fists. The magpie's nest was burned down to the ground. Blood covered the surface. The red mixture filled every river, lake or sinkhole in Green Valley. Chaos erupted everywhere. To calm down the situation, Bankster printed posters with the magpies which had white collars. And indeed, in early elections Beans chose a new political leadership which was settled in the new magpie's nest. Beans helped that living conditions would improve. Bankster had a shortage of banknotes due to bad economic times and bad loans. Therefore he proposed to cut down some trees for the necessary paper, as he was convinced that new loans could revitalize the economy. Beans rolled up their sleeves and cut and cut and cut again. Bankster was a bit quirky again and he added a few more zeros to new note. Money supply increased. Beans were terrified watching the prices of bread rising again. At some point, they could afford only crumbs. Their savings dwindled away. Stomachs were empty, but Beans rolled up their sleeves and worked and worked and worked again. Many more got sore palms. Others were no longer able to repay expensive loans. Bankster seized again many hard-earned houses. Beans turned to Magpie's nest. Magpies with white collars just talked. Apparently they didn't know how to do anything else. Beans gathered again and clenched their fists. The magpie's nest was burned down to the ground. Blood covered the surface. The red mixture filled every river, lake or sinkhole in Green Valley. Bankster was short of banknotes due to chaos, bad economic times and bad loans. He proposed to cut down some trees for the necessary paper, so he could print a delivery of new notes. Of course he had in mind to add a few zeros again. Beans obeyed him again, and so they went looking for suitable trees, but they could not find even one. They had been looking for them 2 weeks. They searched all the valley and eventually found only one uncut tree. They looked at each other, scratched their heads and decided not to cut it down. Beans gathered again. The debate was hot, but this time there was no bloodbath. They made their own elections. This time they didn't vote for magpies, but instead they elected Beans. Bankster was sent away. Printing house was penalized. On the notes they crossed out the zeros and they never added new ones. They never printed new notes either. To situation went back to normal. Each bean had its own modest house and no one was hungry. Palms never got sore again. Beans today live in harmony. In this once green valley,